Let me first of all welcome our two very honored guests, Judge Edwards and Chief Justice Reiber, and Judge Edwards' spouse. You have to understand that their trip from Montreal was not without event. Due to the shutdown, the border control they went through had not been plowed out. If I understand correctly, they were either pushing the car or clearing the snow from the front of the car to go between Canada and the United States. So, welcome. In fact, we were, while you were trying to make your way, we were shoveling out our driveway on Sunday afternoon, and I hope you all survived the snowfall. But we talked with our neighbor, who's a die-hard Vermonter, a retired doctor from Dartmouth Hitchcock, and she told us that wasn't a blizzard. We thought it was. She said, we didn't have any high winds that knocked trees down. We didn't have 3 feet of snow, and we didn't lose power. So now I know what to look forward to in Vermont. So welcome all of you. Welcome the students from Vermont Law School. Welcome the staff of Vermont Law School. Welcome the faculty of Vermont Law School, any alumni who are with us. Honored guests, and in particular the students from White River High School. Thank you for joining us. I hope you're going to find this as interesting as our program promises. You have a terrific speaker, and I just wanted to say a few words to get us started, and then turn it over for our musical selection, Dean Jefferson, which I think is next. So this is a very special day in American history, and also here at Vermont Law School. We mourn the loss of, and we also celebrate the accomplishments of Dr. Martin Luther King, one of the 20th century's best known and most effective advocates for racial equality and nonviolent social change. As I mentioned last year at this occasion, I have two very distant connections to Dr. King. The first is that he's exactly the same age as my father, who is still alive at the age of 89. That's what Dr. King would be today, if not shot down by an assassin's bullet in April of 1968. Thanks in part to Dr. King's work on civil rights in the South, my father, now 89, took time off from his job in 1964 to work in Mississippi defending civil rights workers who were trying to register black voters. And the rumor is that he got beaten up in a courtroom in Mississippi. He doesn't tell the full story, but I'm sure if you knew him, you knew he got in a few good punches first. But the fact that an African-American minister from Atlanta, only 35 years old at the time in 1964, inspired a white lawyer from New York City to leave his family for the summer. By the way, we were dumped in Vermont, which was lovely. We lived in Warren, Vermont, Beth, which was treat up Lincoln Gap Road for the summer. The fact, and my father took that time off to go to the South because of the inspiration of Dr. King, I think speaks volumes of the inspiration he provided to all Americans. My second connection to Dr. King is that I went to listen to him speak in Central Park when I was 12 years old in Sheep's Meadow. However, the crowd was so large and the sound system so limited that I couldn't hear a word that he said. But I felt at the time from the crowd, and I still do, that he was a symbol of the greatness and fairness to which we all, as Americans, aspire. And that's part of why we celebrate that today. So I thought of two things that might relate directly to our students here at Vermont Law School and to the students from White River High School as well. Dr. King was shot down at the tender age of 39, not much older than many of you in the room. And he first attracted national attention in 1955, the year I happened to have been born, when he and other civil rights activists were arrested after leading a boycott of the Montgomery, Alabama Transportation Company, which required non-whites to surrender their seats to whites and stand or sit at the back of the bus. Martin Luther King was 26 years old when he did that. And that's older than I know a number of our students are. So I think that's a sign of what you, as law students and policy students, may be able to accomplish in your already what seems very brief lives. Think of the immense impact that he had. I was also reminded in reviewing Dr. King's biography that he made a very brave step in the mid-1960s, which is to come out against the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was not a central issue to the civil rights movement in the United States, and a number of his advisors recommended that he not dilute his influence and also alienate people, because the Vietnam War was a tremendously divisive subject, by coming out and taking a public position. But he decided that he would risk his reputation because it was so important. He felt at the time it was the right thing to do, and I think you should take that as a lesson of the importance of standing up for what you deeply believe in. So I'm going to end with 3 Martin Luther King quotes, which I particularly like, and some of which are probably familiar to you. The first is as follows. I quote, "There comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular." I think I lost the sound, Bill, but it's okay, I have a loud voice. "There comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must take it because his conscience tells him it is right." Second quote, which relates directly to our law school here. "The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically." Does that sound like a law school class? "Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education." And Ann Debevoise, older than my dad and still thankfully with us, would point out that her husband, Tom Debevoise, was a great believer that part of our job here at Vermont Law School is to instill not only critical thinking skills, but also character. And last but not least, perhaps one of his most famous quotes that we all know, here we go again, which is, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." By the content of their character. Wonderful statement. So I turn it over to our next program, which I think is going to be a musical selection. And thank you very much, all of you, for being here.
Okay, short mic, okay. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I am found. 'Twas blind, but now I see. Thank you. Thank you, Rico. Ray, and then Area.
Good afternoon, everyone. I've been asked to say a few words about this occasion. And so today, we celebrate the life and legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., not only the king of the March on Washington, but also the king of Beyond Vietnam, the king of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and the king of the Poor People's Campaign. He was a man we celebrate as a conscience of a movement that enabled so many of us to be in this moment and in this place. A man prematurely stolen from his time, his people, and the movement. He would have been 90 last week. We will forever shoulder the burden of that theft, a burden we suffer through our community, our fellow citizens, and our people. We have a mission now to carry on, and a hope that we may one day be judged by our character's content and not our complexion. Much has changed since 1968, while other things have not. Over 50 years of the movement since 68, and the harvest of his generation's sacrifice are evident in this room. Culturally, our country has undergone dramatic reformation, some changes for the better, others along the model that the civil rights generation sought to deconstruct. Still, progress made for Black triumphs possible. Those successes create a mandate. Our task now is for paying it forward for the gracious sacrifices that those came before us made for our benefit. It is for ongoing progress that we soldier on, because inaction is folly. My contemporaries reaped some of the greatest benefits and fruits of the civil rights generation's labor. Dr. King Day became a national holiday in my birth year, 1983. I have never known an America where, for the most part of this country, we celebrate his life, legacy, and work. And further, we celebrate the people of that generation that bled for our freedom. The half-century since Dr. King's murder has seen change, more change than anyone in 1968 could have ever dreamt. Any lessons we have learned from that time must only service the legacy and the life of Dr. King and the generation that made that success possible. Though interrupted, his Poor People's Campaign must continue. The women and men who locked arms with him continue to endure, and so too their counsel, their zeal, and their struggle. Some of the earliest law school advice came to me from another man named King. He said to us, "You owe your ancestors an irreparable debt. They died on the hope that one day your condition would be better than theirs. From slave mothers to mothers of the great nadir to Jim Crow mothers, even mothers today, these women all bear their children on the hope that as bad as things are, their children will fight to correct the folly of the present." We celebrate today that we may one day realize Dr. King's hope that our leaders will love justice more than money, that we will one day have a nation of such spiritual fortune that we spend more on social uplift than military might. Rest in power and happy birthday, good doctor. We carry the torch and continue your progress.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. The song I'm about to sing is a gospel song. It's a very lovely song. It's one of my favorites. It's one of my mom's favorites. It's one of Dean Jefferson's mom's favorites. So it's, I have a lot of weight on my shoulders right now. But I just wanted to say that this song served as a crucial reminder during the civil rights movement that in the midst of calamity and hardship, that if God could take a look and keep and watch over a sparrow, then he would surely be able to watch over you. Why should I feel discouraged? And why should the shadows come? Why should my heart feel lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion, a constant friend is he. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. I sing because I'm happy, and I sing because I'm free. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. I sing because I'm happy, and I sing because I'm free. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. Thank you.
Ariel, thank you very much. I warned our speaker he was about to hear something very special. Thank you also, Ray, and others for great, great music. I have the particular pleasure of introducing the Chief Justice of the Vermont Supreme Court, Justice Reiber, who I have gotten to know. He has been a good friend, excuse me, he has been a good friend to Vermont Law School and its students. I can remember a real blizzard earlier last year over in Rutland at the Inns of Court meeting when one of our students got stuck in a snowdrift, and Justice Reiber and I were looking out the window, and he suggested I might want to go down and help her get out of the snowdrift. And when the Chief Justice makes a suggestion, you follow it. And I did, and they did get out of the snowdrift. It all worked out well. Justice Reiber is a graduate of Hampden-Sydney College in Virginia, graduate of Suffolk Law School. He was in private practice here in Vermont, and I understand one of his law partners was Peter Hall, who was the Second Circuit judge. He was appointed as an Associate Justice of the Vermont Supreme Court in 2004, and three, and then Chief Justice in 2004, right afterwards. So he did well on the job by Governor Douglas. And if those of students who have already had the pleasure of getting to know Justice Reiber know how interested he is in you and your careers, I will just mention for all the lawyers in the room and the policy-making master's students that Justice Reiber led the charge this past year in a lawyer well-being effort following a national program to make sure that all the law students and policy students and the lawyers in Vermont, whether they work in government, nonprofit, or private firms, are provided with as many resources as possible to ensure their well-being, and we very much thank him for that effort. Justice Reiber.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everybody. I think I just dropped my paper. Where is it? There it is. That's the one. That's the one. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Dean Jefferson. You are a stalwart at this institution, and I love what you do. You know, I love your commitment to the students, something that I hold very dear to my heart myself. The effort that we see here this afternoon, wait a minute, this is why I wanted the sheet. Ray, man, that was terrific. That was just terrific. I'd like to have... Ray comes to Inns of Court. You all should come to Inns of Court. Ray comes to Inns of Court. Ray, I'd like to have a transcript of that if you would send it to me. Would you? Huh? And Ricardo, I mean, what a voice. Where is he? What a voice. And Ariel, I met Ariel on my way in. I had no idea what was coming. And let me say, by the way, when we sang the anthem, I'm so standing right here, I was glad the microphone was off. I should say that. Jimmy Edwards is a good friend of mine. He and I serve on a wonderful organization that's called the National Center for State Courts. This is an institution that has so inspired me in the law. I cannot give adequate words to it. The National Center for State Courts is really an umbrella organization that envelops all these other judge and judicial organizations like the Conference of Chief Justices that I'm very involved in as well. But the National Center is the umbrella. The National Center is doing rule of law projects around the entire world. It is phenomenal, and Jimmy knows this because the two we serve on the board of directors, and we get the information. We meet 3 times a year, and the people who are involved, bar none, are tremendous, tremendous people. I am so glad to bring you one of those tremendous people here this afternoon, Jimmy Edwards and his wife, Stacy. Jimmy will tell you, and I'm going to tell you, that he and I have been talking about him coming to Vermont, to our small state, right? I think we have a population, Jimmy, that's about the same as the city of St. Louis, maybe, I think, a little smaller. We're not a big town, that's for sure. But we have big town problems. And we need big town ideas to solve and address those problems. And this is one of the reasons that I've been, and let me say this, the diversity in this school is something that gives me chills up my spine. I love it. I absolutely love it. You guys are just terrific. It is so inspiring to see young faces of every ethnicity who are here devoting themselves to the principles of the foundation of our democracy. So I want to talk a little bit about that because I'm not just going to introduce you. They gave me a little time, Shirley said, "You can do what you want." I said, "Shirley, can I speak?" She said, "You can do what you want, Chief." All right.
I know who's the boss.
You know who's the boss. We got a story about that, Shirley. So I've got some prepared remarks, and I'm going to read them, but don't take this as my detachment from any of you all. By the way, high school young people that are here, you are terrific. To come here to celebrate the life of this great man whose photograph is next to me here on the stage, and to come to a better understanding of what his life means, not only for black people, but for poor people, people of every ethnicity, what the principles are that he stood for. We have got to make sure that we remember those principles, that we celebrate his life every single year. So that's why we're here today, and I'm really pleased that you're here to join us. So let me say good afternoon. It's a pleasure. I didn't think I was going to speak this long before I started this, but once you get wound up, it's hard to stop. Jimmy, you know this better than I do. Wait till you hear him. You think this is... I've been with him all morning, him and Stacy. We were at the State House. I'm telling you, he had him on the floor. That's about where they were. By the time we got finished, they were ready to follow him out the door. What do you want, Judge? Just tell us. Okay, so it's a pleasure to be here to introduce my good friend Jimmy and his wife. Jimmy, you and Stacy coming here must be a little like landing in a foreign country. Gee, come to think of it, you landed in Canada to get here. It's true. They had to go to Montreal. They couldn't get into Burlington. So now I've been to Missouri. I've been to St. Louis. I heard you speak and say that's the first time I heard you speak when you spoke at the Conference of Chiefs annual meeting in St. Louis. My memory is that Vermont doesn't look that much like Missouri. Am I right? Here we have mountainous, snow-covered roads, as I think you're now familiar. And until recently, believe it or not, we had more cows than people. And frequently, when driving, you see cautionary road signs for deer. They told me this at dinner last night. They couldn't believe it. Deer, moose. Jimmy says, I've never seen a cautionary sign for a moose before. And Stacy said, and there was one for a bear. Along with street names like Doe Hill Lane and Fox Creek Run. Aren't those sweet? And I know you've got winter in St. Louis, but yesterday it was about 35 degrees colder here than it was there by my reckoning. On the other hand, you and I have much in common. We serve on that board that I just spoke about where we first met, when the judge several years ago received a celebrated national award called the Rehnquist Award that was given at the U.S. Supreme Court by the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts. And over the years, I have gained a deep appreciation for your devotion to justice, your skill as a communicator, and someone who gets things done. And I'm immensely grateful for your presence here today and the effort it took to get here. But allow me to introduce you with just a few words, as I said, about this day. Some have said the life we're here to celebrate today, the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., is the celebration of a day of truth. The celebration of a day of truth. MLK was devoted to the truth. He told the truth. I would suggest that that is why we celebrate him, why we revere him. But today, at times, the commitment to telling the truth seems just out of reach of the dialogue that takes place in the public square. I suppose in some ways we are all devoted to our own stories of truth, or what we hope is so. So maybe, should we be more focused on where hope lies? Thurgood Marshall, a truth teller of the first order, gave a speech in 1987 at the 200th year celebration of the U.S. Constitution. It was a remarkable speech. I encourage you to look it up and read it. And in it, he said he could not accept an oversimplified celebration of that 1787 U.S. Constitution, because it was a Constitution that guaranteed liberty and justice to all, but denied both to black slaves and their descendants. Instead, Justice Marshall said, he would celebrate the, quotes, momentous events which followed, the 14th Amendment after the Civil War is one example, and all the changes, he said, that triumphed over much of what was wrong with the original document, and he would therefore observe that anniversary in 1987 with hopes not realized and promises not fulfilled. Those are his words. The Constitution is our country's social contract, a statement of shared standards, and it guarantees, we, the people, guarantee justice and equality to all. But we should also observe that despite the changes that Justice Thurgood Marshall justly celebrated in 1987, we remain today with hopes not realized and promises not fulfilled. So on this day, every year, we recommit to work for what was previously agreed upon, that racism is unacceptable, that truth matters, and that the most vulnerable among us deserve protection. And our speaker today is someone who is frankly an inspiration to me and an example of truth be told. He has served the notion of justice in different roles. In one, he served as judge. The job of judges, of course, the job of courts, is to secure public trust in our system of justice. And he, Jimmy Edwards, has done that so well. MLK Jr. said, as many of you know, the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. Justice is pursued through the law, in court. Those efforts, those places in which emphasis is on fairness and the essential human dignity of every person. But MLK would say, I think, that in addition, respect for every person's essential human dignity speaks to a truth beyond the black letter law. So to speak to that and its importance to each of us, there's no one I know better equipped to do that than Jimmie Edwards. Judge Edwards is a man who exemplifies service to his community. Judge Edwards grew up in St. Louis, earned his undergraduate and law degrees from St. Louis U, worked as a corporate lawyer, and then served as a judge for more than 20 years. In 2017, he was appointed the Director of Public Safety for the city of St. Louis, where he serves today. All his life, he has dedicated himself to serving others, serving his community, and he has served his community well. Probably, he's best known for his work on behalf of at-risk youth. In 2009, Judge Jimmie Edwards, together with help from the public school system and others, opened a court-supervised school dedicated to rehabilitating at-risk youth called the Innovative Concept School. It's the only school of its kind in the country. Judge Edwards has said that the students come to the school. Why? Because they have nowhere else to go. The school is safe and out of the weather, and they stay there and they get an education. There, people care about them. They get a second chance to learn what they need to lead and live a good life. People magazine named Judge Edwards the Hero of the Year in 2011. In 2013, as I said, he received the National William H. Rehnquist Award for Judicial Excellence. That award was given by the National Center for State Courts, is presented by Chief Justice John Roberts at a ceremony at the annual Rehnquist dinner in the Great Hall at the U.S. Supreme Court. But Judge Edwards has said, I haven't done anything magical. The question that I ask is, did you do good when nobody was looking? In my mind, it's what I do for others that matters most. Well, we're looking now, Jimmie, and we're learning from his example. Please join me in welcoming Judge Jimmie Edwards.
Thank you, Chief Justice Paul Reiber, for your kind and generous introduction, and for extending to me this wonderful invitation to come to Vermont. You flatter me by asking me to speak today. You are a good friend and colleague. Every year we seek each other out, to sit next to each other, to have dinner with each other. We share a passion for social justice and the rule of law. Just this morning, you took my wife and I to the State House. You gave me the opportunity to meet with Governor Scott and his entire cabinet. You gave me an opportunity to meet with Vermont state representatives assigned to the Judiciary Committee. And of course, you took me to your chambers, where I had the opportunity to sit and talk to your colleagues, justices of the Vermont Supreme Court. So thank you, Chief Justice Reiber, for the opportunity. And let me say, I also feel particularly privileged to be invited in January. August would have been much better. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Dean Jefferson. I had the pleasure of being in the car from Montreal, my wife and I, with Natasha. I sure hope that she's here. What a wonderful, wonderful young student who I believe who I believe that our profession yearns for. So thank you for your diligence. Thank you so much for your patience. She told me a lot. By the time I made it to Vermont, I knew about the tort professor, Professor Lathan. I knew about all of the student leaders, but I knew a whole lot about Dean Jefferson, who obviously has a wonderful heart, a passion for our students. So thank you so very much. You have provided an enjoyable and perfect opportunity for my wife and I at every twist and at every turn. So thank you so very much. Just want to take the opportunity to say hello to all the kids that come from the Vermont Law School, the kids that come from Bethel, Turnbridge, Sharon, Chelsea, and Rochester. I'm so happy that all of you are here. So thank you. I believe it to be urgent and responsible to acknowledge the students, be them high school students or law students. I believe it responsible toward continuing the American promise of equal opportunity for all of them. So professors from the law school, staff, alumni, thank you for opening the doors to our students. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. You know, I am not accustomed to your New England winters, having spent my entire life in St. Louis, Missouri. Likewise, I suspect that many of you are not accustomed to life in St. Louis, particularly for impoverished minorities in the inner city. That's why I asked Dean Jefferson for the opportunity to share my documentary for Akeem with you this afternoon. I believe that will help you appreciate the context for the remarks that I will give this afternoon. Perhaps, like some of you, I have spoken on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on several Januaries. It's always humbling but rewarding. We remind ourselves of the immeasurable impact of Dr. King's life on society today. We mark our progress as a nation while always reminding ourselves never to let his dream die. But you know, each Martin Luther King Day is different for me. This year, my mind is on the pervasive efforts to undo progress America has made since Dr. King's time. Now, let me make it clear that I believe in the ultimate power of love, that most people want to live in fellowship with their neighbors, and that peace and harmony ultimately will prevail. Yet, still it tries the soul to hear such shrieking from extremists today about the dangers presented and the evils supposedly inherent in those of different color, religions, nations of origin, gender, political philosophies, whatever can divide us. It chills us to see the demonic faces of rage and hatred exhibited day after day in assemblies across this country, including in our greatest institution in Washington, D.C. And as much as we want to believe that these are the actions of a very tiny portion of our fellow Americans who can never prevail, it gets our attention when we see Nazis marching in our streets. for many of the young folks here today. The 51 years since Dr. King still walked the earth must seem an eternity. The civil rights movement, to the extent we know it, seems a part of a distant era. But is it really? When we're still talking about who does and who does not get to call themselves American. Who's standing and who's kneeling during the anthem? Who gets to picnic in our parks? Sell ice water on the corner, take a nap in the student lounge, attend a swimming party, or enter their own condo building. No, there is a continuing, disquieting, and growing awareness of separate and unequal conditions in this country. Whether in law enforcement, where I currently labor, in the courts, where I remain engaged, in education, my passion and calling, health care, or simply in living while Black, where we see reminders almost daily that many Americans automatically assume that dark-skinned folks just don't belong in some places. In St. Louis, like too many places across this country, racial inequity is still in the air. Many of our fellow Americans are still hurt, sick, wounded, angry, depressed, and disillusioned. We may be wondering, after all these Januaries of recommitting ourselves to Dr. King's dream, have we been asleep? Have we been fooling ourselves about the advancement of civil rights, equal opportunity, and our role in society? Were the sacrifices and hard work of Dr. King all those decades ago in vain? Will I be my own spoiler and answer those questions with a resounding no, no, no? More on that later. But first, I want to remind you that Dr. King's dream never was for African Americans only. No, he knew that injustice knows no boundaries. He knew that America could not remain the leader of the free world, a beacon of hope for oppressed people everywhere, as long as any Black teen, poor white student, gay couple, Muslim merchant, older worker, a female professor did not enjoy the same rights and protections of every other American. One of his most famous quotes, still as applicable today as it was 50 years ago, is we must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools. Yes, the dream, his dream, my dream, our dream is for all of us in this audience today, all of us back in St. Louis, all of us on farms in small towns and in vast metropolitan areas, all of us Republican, all of us Democrat and independent, all of us young and all of us old, rich, poor, uneducated, undereducated, privileged, and underprivileged. All of us, Black, white, brown, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, atheist, committed, complacent, anarchist, apathetic, male, female, transgender, gay, inmate, police, prosecutors, defendants, judges, politicians. Yes, you name it, all of us. You know, we mustn't get bogged down in a lot of labels. We can't succumb to the efforts to divide ourselves over fine points and lose sight of our larger commonality. We must never lose sight of the dream. Like Dr. King, all I say to us is be true to what our founders put on paper. If I lived in China or Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand the denial of basic rights and equality because they have not committed themselves like we have. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read about the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read about equal protection and due process of law. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right. Just allow me to offer a little more context for my theme, all of us. 4 years ago, in a suburb of St. Louis, just 2 minutes from my office, a small suburb called Ferguson, Missouri. The shooting of a young black man, Mike Brown, by a white police officer triggered pent-up frustrations over residual racism, disparities in the power structure, barriers we have yet to overcome in achieving not only Dr. King's dream, but the promise of the United States Constitution. I'm sure many of you recall the civil disturbance that followed for more than a year following Ferguson. It was a setback, no doubt, but it was also an important and very vital wake-up call. We've heard a lot since the Ferguson protests about the Black Lives Matter movement, and some who respond, all lives matter. Of course, both are correct. But I offer you this analogy. Let's say you live in a neighborhood and one house is on fire. You call the fire department and they say all houses matter. Yes, that's very true. But the point is that we've got to deal with what is in front of us, a burning house, before the others catch fire. We can't just deal with the universal until we've taken care of the particulars. Yes, black lives do matter because all lives matter. Police lives matter. Brown lives matter. White lives matter, and so on. But we cannot ignore the screams that are coming from that house on fire, particularly because we live in one neighborhood and the entire neighborhood matters. So although we all regret that Ferguson happened, I am truly excited and hopeful and gratified by something I have witnessed since then. We've seen a movement that is bringing forth young, inspired, and marvelously effective leadership. Don't get me wrong, to be sure, this movement includes all ages and is diverse in every regard. But as with the civil rights and the anti-war movements in Dr. King's lifetime, it is predominantly led by the young. It's driven by that very basic but still dynamic and revolutionary concept, one written into our very Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, that all lives do matter equally. This movement is shouting this founding principle in the halls of power, the centers of commerce, the enclaves of the rich, and in our entertainment coliseums. But I also see the powerful affirmation of Dr. King's dream for all lives resounding among the poor, the marginalized, and the disenfranchised. We need to hear it as much as the police, the politicians, the corporate brokers, and educators. And perhaps, inspired by Black Lives Matter, people are taken to the streets to demand other basic rights and freedoms, including the right to live without fear of random deaths and bloodshed from madmen. Yes, nearly all are men who carry a grudge and a firearm. Also marching today are women who demand the right to live and work without sexual assault or harassment. I am happy to report that despite what our media shows us, despite what many prefer Americans to believe, the truth is that by far the vast majority of protest actions across this entire country have been peaceful and very much in the tradition of Dr. King's civil disobedience. And today's young leaders, by and large, have separated themselves from those who, through violence and property damage, would set back the progress we've made. But we have to recognize that the current generation of young adults is very different from my generation. Of course, they have no personal memory of Dr. King, nor do many of their parents. We may wish for them to go back and take a refresher course in civil rights and on the movement, but that's getting it backward, I feel. It is we, the adults, the baby boomers, who need to adjust. We can take a lesson from these young leaders and take up the vision from their fresh eyes. And their worldview is that race, an artificial construct after all, simply should not matter. Not anymore. We need to understand that today's movements spring from different roots. Obviously, they're not fighting for the right to sit at the lunch counter for the first time, to enroll in public schools, to have the ability to vote. No, they are reacting to the quietude and complacency that we allowed to settle in after the hard-won victories of Dr. King and all of the other great civil rights leaders. And the grievances they are articulating are all the more poignant and compelling for it. They haven't had to face down a Bull Connor or a George Wallace. Many have come under the age of an African-American president. But they are calling out the more subtle, insidious undercurrent of race and class division that we have allowed to creep back into the American culture. And they're telling us we're past all that. You see, in their minds, we're in a new era of governance where it's no longer enough to be effective. You also have to be equitable. Our children are crying out to us from the rural areas of America to urban areas of America. They're saying every life matters. They're shaking us up to recognize that the struggle of each underprivileged individual is our own struggle. Black folk can't pursue a separate agenda from those who face discrimination because of their physical abilities, their gender, their religion, their country of origin, their age, or sexual orientation. Look at the faces of those that you see in the demonstrations today, and you see that indeed we are all in this together. After years of erosions of Dr. King's dream, I believe that this time it will effect positive and lasting change toward his ultimate vision of all of us working together. For when people get caught up with that which is right, and they are willing to sacrifice for it, there is no stopping point short of victory. Dr. King's words. At the same time, we need to remember that a youth movement is sometimes innocent, sometimes naive, sometimes rash. The young, particularly in the age of instant communication and 24-hour journalism, can be too quick to follow false prophets, to believe malicious rumors, to succumb to vile incitements. We have to counsel careful evaluation, patience, and focus, keeping eyes on the prize, as we said during King's time. And for those of us who are older, we must not just turn activism over to the kids and get out of the way. To go along with this youth movement, we need a parent movement. We need to make sure that others are not teaching our children the ways of hate. We need to be careful of what we say and how we act in the privacy of our homes. Because if our children hear us venting at our worst around the house when the public is not looking, they will not accept our wiser counsel in our better moments. We must always model positivism, good citizenship, and inclusion, and never engage in invective epithets. You see, no matter how we try to fake it, in the public, our children will always know the truth of our hearts. I've heard a familiar slogan resurface lately: power succumbs to nothing but power. I don't necessarily disagree, but I think we've got to look at the transference of power differently now. It's not a zero-sum game anymore. You don't have to gain power by taking it away from somebody else. We can grow our own. Now is the time for the young people in this audience to become our leaders. And we need to have the courage and the ability to invite young, diverse leadership into our court chambers, our political organizations, our community, our universities, churches, human rights organizations. Those who have attained the upper ranks need to be looking at what comes after. Identify, cultivating, and nurturing new breed. I also know that many of the efforts to promote change today focus on relations between police and the minority communities. That's understandable and necessary. But we must dig much further down for solutions to address narrow issues that led to the current tensions. The solutions we seek must be broad and far-reaching. They must include politics and governance, education, job opportunities, and abatement in gun violence and gang warfare, social justice issues. In politics, it's going to take much more than the traditional voter registration drives and get out the vote efforts on election day. We have to restore confidence that politics can bring positive solutions. We have to actively seek out young leaders, train and inspire them. Most of all, make room for them in our political structures. We need to face the fact that across the country, we have become politically stagnant under old dynasties that young people see as more interested in preserving themselves than in collaborating for revolutionary change. Some may believe, albeit falsely, that we are inevitably on the long and progressive trajectory toward equality of opportunity and inclusion in this country. They, and I know my good friend Justice Riper cited it, the moral universe being long, but always bending toward justice. But let me suggest to you that there is nothing inevitable about it. Take, for example, our public schools. And that's the reason I'm so happy that our public school students are here, and perhaps some of their parents and the staff. Our public school system, one cherished as the principal means by which any of us can achieve the American dream, the great equalizer, I like to say. But for decades, our federal, state, and local governments have been reducing support and actually handicapping public education. Just look at Los Angeles, California today. I believe that it has come to the point that we have to virtually reinvent the system. That's going to take a political effort of Herculean proportions, but we can do it. Remember, the No Child Left Behind Act, as imperfect as it may be, was a bipartisan effort. I believe that we can continue to find political common ground for education because it is in all of our best interests. We must throw out our old model of funding school districts almost entirely from property taxes within their own borders. It has failed students and perpetuated a death spiral for both urban and rural districts. There are no winners in this scenario, only losers. We can and we must find the political will to change it. Equalizing funding across socio-economic boundaries. But until we get to that educational promised land, we need to make sure that even with our stress systems, we keep our children on track and refuse to give up on any child. Having spent 25 years as a circuit court judge, I can tell you that the lack of education is the best predictor of society's dropouts. If you ever get lucky enough to spend a day with Justice Reiber or any other judge in criminal courts, I can guarantee you that you're not going to see many college graduates in orange jumpsuits standing before a judge. Education is the key. It is the key to so many of life's rewards. Certainly, it is a key to a stable paycheck. We all want that. But with education comes the opportunity to provide and open doors and explore opportunities that provide much more than a paycheck. Opportunities to make a contribution to change the world that we live in. You see, in every nation on earth, every city, every suburb, every ghetto, people strive for a better life for themselves and for their next generation by sending their children to school. It's what we all want. And to this end, it is our collective duty to do justice for all of our children. And once we succeed in getting our children through school and into the job market, we as a society must make sure that it's worth their while. They must face a level playing field with equal opportunities at the outset and a promise to advance if they compete well on the field, irrespective of their race, their gender, or anything else. For how else can we expect our children to reject gang lifestyles and criminality unless they can realistically expect a just reward and a living wage for working hard and playing by the rules? It's a tall order, I know. And believe me, I can go on and on about the changes we need to make toward realizing equality. It can seem overwhelming. I have said a lot this afternoon. I believe that this talk can be summed up by sharing with you Dr. King's favorite quote. Often, Dr. King would quote Mahatma Gandhi. We must be the change we want to see in the world? Pretty simple, right? Except that here we are, nearly a century since Gandhi uttered that truth, and a half century since Dr. King articulated the dream, and just about 27 minutes since I started talking. And still, we struggle with it. I suggest to you that what we have failed to clearly embrace over all that time is that being the change applies to us all. Dr. King didn't expect, and nor can we, that only the other guy would change. King's dream indeed was for all of us. King's dream indeed was for each of us. Each of us in St. Louis, Missouri. Each of us in Vermont. But so is the responsibility to participate in and to become that change. Don't let the scope of the problem, the fact that it is still a part of a vast system of inequities, stop you. That's the challenge. You have a duty. So I leave you with the words of the great Rabbi Hillel, spoken more than 2,000 years ago. If not me, who? If not now, when? Thank you very much. Happy King's Day.
Thank you. I know some of you all have to go to class, and I know the high school kids have to leave. We just want to present them with a token of appreciation. Then we'll sing We Shall Overcome. Then we're out of here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariana Munoz, and on behalf of the Latin American and Caribbean Law Student Association and the Office for Student Affairs and Diversity, I am honored to present this appreciation award to the Honorable Jimmie M. for his passion and commitment to helping others who cannot help themselves. He has done this by creating the Innovative Concept Academy, the first school in the U.S. supervised by a judge and dedicated to educating juvenile delinquents. At this academy, a holistic approach is taken to each individual while celebrating success instead of focusing what society might consider failures, thus creating an opportunity for all. This is something that truly resonates with my social work background. As creating sustainable and impactful change in the world, his dedication and work are truly inspiring. I strive to one day leave the world better than how I found it, just as he has done. Please join me in congratulating him.
All right. While they're taking their picture, I would like to thank Kathy McCullough for helping me put this program together. I'd like to thank Angie Campbell and Karen Henderson for their hard work for the programs, their press release, and also flyers. Thank you. Okay, if we could please stand and join hands. This is what we used to do in the South after those mass meetings with Dr. King. So we're going to do it here. Thank you.